Thank you for joining us today for today's session on road safety management and leadership. My name is Jamie McKenzie. I'm the chair of the SA Chapter, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the lands that we meet on today are the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country, along with the importance of their cultural and heritage beliefs. I'd also like to thank the rest of the SA Chapter Committee who helped out with organising today's session. We have people joining us here at the State Library of South Australia, as well as those online. And we also have a speaker with us here and another speaker who's online. So that is to say, please bear with me while I play with all the controls, because it's going to get a bit complicated, but we'll get there. If anyone is online and things aren't working, please jump in the chat and let me know. I'll be monitoring. The plan for the session today is we'll have two speakers who I'll introduce in a minute, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for a Q&A session. So please send in your questions, get them ready in the audience, and obviously use the Q&A feature online, and we'll get those to the speakers. A little bit of housekeeping for those who are in the audience. If you need the bathroom, it's around the corner and down the stairs. The session will be recorded, so for those online that might need to duck out, we'll be able to get a copy of that to you later. The SA Chapter is hoping to organise, fingers crossed, one more session for the year, and we're also in the process of planning an end-of-year function, so please keep an eye out for those and come along if you're available. Yes, I can flick over. Excellent. Obviously, the best way to keep an eye out, of course, is to become a member of the ACRS. There are a number of benefits for members, as you can see here, not least of which is discounted registration to our annual road safety conference, which this year is being held in Perth. But one of the other big things is we have multiple networks through the ACRS now. So we've got Women in Road Safety, Early Career Professionals, local government, international outreach, our fairly new road policing network, and a very newly launched heavy vehicles network. So if any of those things are of interest, please think about joining up and taking part. There's a weekly alert with updates on what's happening in road safety, opportunities to be involved in ACRS policy position statements. As I mentioned, discounts to attend the conference, but also all ACRS events, such as today's session. The membership fees are reasonable, so please do think about signing up and check it out. But with that, we'll get on with the show. So I'm going to introduce both speakers now, and then we can just flow through as we go. So the first speaker will be Martin Small, who is Principal of Martin Small Consulting and a Non-Executive Director of RAA. He's a leading road safety management consultant and is currently engaged on a variety of projects for clients including Austroads, the World Bank, and the United Nations. Over a 22-year public service career, Martin was the head of road safety in New Zealand and then in South Australia. He was the president of the Australasian College of Road Safety from 2019 to 2022. Our second speaker will be Bernard Carlon, who is currently the Chief Centre for Road Safety and Maritime Safety at Transport for New South Wales. Bernard joined Transport for New South Wales in 2012 as Director, Strategy and Policy, and has led the Centre for Road Safety since 2015 and Maritime Safety since 2016. He is a board member of ANCAP and a member of the Austroads Safety Task Force. Bernard has previously worked in health, police and environment sectors at the executive level in policy, communications, program delivery and regulation. I also have it on good authority that Bernard is one of Australia's longest serving senior road safety public servants, and last year was awarded the Public Service Medal. So he's well and truly qualified to be speaking to us today. All right, let's get to our first speaker. If you want to come up, Martin, and I will fiddle with controls.
Thanks, Jamie. While you fiddle with controls, I'll say welcome to everybody here and welcome to everybody online, whether it's just right today or on record. I have a few disclaimers. This is an event organised by the South Australian Chapter of the College, but you'll see very quickly, this is not a South Australian presentation, it's a presentation which is relevant across Australasia at least. This is a taste, it's not a lecture. I don't cover every part of road safety management, except you'll see every part of road safety management, and we can discuss any part of that that you wish. It's relevant to all organisations who have any engagement with road transport, whether they are commercial transport providers or commissioners of transport. And of course, it's done in a spirit of no blame. Nevertheless, there may be some challenging aspects in this for some people or institutions. Do pile in with any questions online, that would be great, and really looking forward to hearing what Bernard has to say after me to give a much more jurisdictional focused flavour, and I think we've got a good hour lined up for you. Okay, so disclaimers over. I'd like to talk about management, interventions and results, about a much more systematic approach, about governance systems, about going upstream, and I'm going to just talk through a very live case study about the issues that inevitably involved when you're engaged in the road safety management task. And of course, the road safety management task is all about results. It's not some ethereal, bureaucratic, paper-pushing thing. It's actually about how many people are being killed and seriously injured on the road. And I know that Bernard today will have received an update on what that picture looks like in New South Wales, because that's what happens. You're sitting there and you receive every piece of update about the primary trauma which is going on. It's all about results. Regrettably, in Australia and New Zealand, there's been persistent poor performance in road trauma prevention over the last several years. In Australia, we're in the fourth year of year-upon-year increase in fatalities. Now, some of that is natural, given COVID and the slump in traffic and all of that sort of thing. So one would expect some bounce back, but it's not just bouncing back, it's bouncing back to worse than what it was. So something needs to be done. Significant new investment and policy decisions will be required to get us back on track. And doing what we know will get us a long way. But will it realise our ultimate goal? My contention is that unless we address the management systems that have led to our current performance, our problems will simply return. So the core of the, oh, crikey, sorry about that. I put it on thing. Anyway, Jamie will tell me when I need to shut up and pass on. The core of the road safety management discipline has developed from a framework which essentially recognises the primacy of management functions producing interventions that in turn produce results. And that is this is a sort of a foundational framework from within which we look at the road safety management task. And of course, a good bit of focus is on that bottom layer of activity, coordination, legislation, etc. The management functions can be further differentiated, and I've seen people differentiate that. They've explained it in different ways. Actually, what they're doing is unpicking these things and explaining more and more detail. There are many different descriptions of the interventions. We could say that planning, design, operation and use of the road network is actually this big differentiator between the quality of the inherent quality of the network and the speed that is allowed to be travelled. There's all sorts of ways in which those interventions can be described and categorised. And different results may be sought at different times. And it's been encouraging seeing some of the work in some of the jurisdictions that have gone into some greater depth on safety performance factors, for example. Be that as may, the way in which we look at all of these things, the quality of the management systems are fundamental to driving the quality of the interventions and the results that'll be achieved. It's not the only framework that uses, oh, crikey, I've missed to shut that up now, sorry. It's not the only framework that focuses on the management approach. There are a lot of different systems level models that pursue a management approach rather than a sort of an intervention approach. Of course, the work health and safety hierarchy of control is familiar to a number of people. The stamp model in the top is something which I think we should be making more use of in a diagnostic tool at least. The FIA Road Safety Index is all actually about management systems that are in place in order to drive interventions in order to get results. The ISO 39001 Road Traffic Safety Management Systems is very clearly aligned here, and so are things like the Asian Development Bank's maturity assessment of national road safety management systems. So we're talking about a collection of things which fundamentally come back to this question of how well we have our management systems in place, because we need to take a much more systematic approach to much more systematic management approach. There hasn't been strong systems thinking approach to road safety, I would suggest. We talk about pillars still, not interactions between different elements of the system. We talk about shared responsibility still, which really muddles up discussions about accountability. And I would be the very first person to say that it's essential to analyse investment and policy requirements, which I would sort of say is the intervention approach. If we can just get our data and our money things all lined up and make the ultimate rational argument for safety investment, we'll be okay. That's completely insufficient in my view. It's also essential to address the systems which constrain success. And I'd say that what we're facing is a management approach which remains significantly underdone. So there's some barriers in those things, and these are things which people have said to me, about systems thinking, that everything is connected to everything else. So how do I unpick all of these things? What I would say is let's identify the most critical interactions within the system. And some of that is being done. In terms of professional capacity, people say, this is very confusing. I just want to build a better road. I just want to, fix that bit of the vehicle fleet. Actually, that just says to me that we need to clarify the responsibilities of different people within the road transport system. And then if you go into sort of more formal management stuff, such as safety management systems, I've had people say to me that the likes of non-conformance reporting is bureaucratic time wasting. And to some extent, I can sort of sympathise with that. However, that's not how the safest transport modes function. They function by regulating activity through certifiable management systems, which are expected to be improved over time and can be assessed for compliance with the law, and decisions being made about whether that entity can continue to function within the road transport system. So one of the other things that I think is really important is actually to have a strong governance perspective. And you'll see this picture in some upcoming guidance, but I've been using this for quite some years now not because it's the be all and end all. Actually, I missed the statement there that this is a very generic model. So basically, when I go into a new jurisdiction, I would say that this broad picture of having a board in place, an executive which is charged with delivering the board's strategy and helping drive that strategy, and engagement with the stakeholders is absolutely essential. If you don't have this, you're really in difficulty. And some of these function very well, and some of them function very poorly. Some of them just don't exist. But you need some sort of structure which is essentially very consistent with an overall governance perspective. And when you take that perspective, you can start running some very simple management and leadership lines around setting strategy, about developing plans, about delivering on those plans, evaluating them and improving them over time. A key thing I think is really important and was emphasised to me earlier this year is just this notion of going upstream. You know, we're stopped as a profession. We know that we can't obsess about the operator. I mean, that's still taking some time to wash through the community at large. But as a professional community, we've gone beyond that. But I don't think we're going upstream sufficiently. So Brett Hughes prepared this graphic which talks about authority, responsibility and control. Where are the primary responsibilities for road traffic injury prevention lying? And it is reasonably clear that the sheer scale of the government involvement in raising funds, in building networks, on regulating entry to those networks by vehicles and by drivers, and all of the planning and engagement legislation with non-government stakeholders, it really does put the onus on governments to organise their systems in a way which allows other stakeholders to make much safer choices about the services that they deliver. And in doing that, I think it's really important to differentiate between the roles and responsibilities. I do not wish to get into sort of passing on particular sort of categorisations or the like, but I would suggest that there are 4 broad entities that we need to distinguish between. One is government officials and agencies, elected and unelected, because of the sheer scope of government ownership within the area. Industry, by which I mean entities which create transport technologies and services. Organisations which use those transport technologies and services, and almost every organisation does in some fashion. It's actually hard to identify and describe an organisation which does not. Increasingly, there are simply virtual organisations, but that's pretty rare in the great sweep of human endeavour. And then, of course, there are actually responsibilities within a sort of a civil society perspective. So I wanted to just give you some ideas and some perspectives, a taste. But I thought it would be useful to speak about a very specific set of issues which go to the core of the road safety management and leadership task. Now, this is I know exactly where this road is, but it's not a road associated with any jurisdiction in Australia. I would suggest, or New Zealand, I would suggest that the essence of what we see here is right across. It's a problem right across Australia and New Zealand. And so where do you start? So looking back at this photo a couple of days ago, I wonder where do you start? What is the level of governance issues associated with this situation? I would suggest they're substantial. How is legislation being managed in order to facilitate this? And interestingly, because there's going to be a regulatory impact assessment of rural speed limits in Australia, this is going to be a very real and live issue right now. How do we communicate and promote safety with this sort of thing? You know, people in regional Australia, they smell a rat a mile away. And they know people aren't serious about safety when they see things like this. What does it say about funding? About where money should be spent and how that money should be spent associated with the risk that's involved. Do we really need to put in sort of counters or, you know, go into the data to work out whether this is a safe environment or not? I'd suggest not. And what does it say about our knowledge systems when this is in place? As I say, this is not a takedown of any body or any institution. It's simply a picture of the scale of the problem that we have and the management and leadership systems which are going to need to be put in place to actually deal with them in a systematic way. We know that this road is extremely dangerous. So do we bankrupt the country and make these roads safe at this speed? Do we simply change the speed limit? And anybody who has engaged in that rural endeavour knows exactly the issues associated with that. Or do we lead a process of change? So another thing which is very live at the moment is safety star ratings. And we know this stuff. We know that the United Nations has set 3 stars as a minimum standard. It's our bête noire minimum standards in safety. But we know that's actually not nearly enough. And actually, if we're going to achieve or get close to realising the community's vision for safety on the road, we're going to have to amp that up quite some distance. I won't go into rehearsing the story of this. Suffice to say that the first road assessment program was EuroRAP in 1999. Then came OSRAP, then US RAP, then Kiwi RAP. And we're still wondering what on earth is going on with the safety of our road network. When I became involved with the Australasian College of Road Safety, I was told that there was going to be a submission to federal parliamentarians. So I thought, oh well, we should have a look at that and see what our ask might be. So in 2017, the college called on the federal government to make the publication of targeted safety star ratings on the national road network a condition for any Commonwealth investment in the network from 2017-18 onwards. Perfectly reasonable thing, it seemed to me, that actually the road authorities should actually make this information available on about the safety of their network. Interestingly, it wasn't 2 years later when I was told that this was completely unacceptable because, you know, this would mean that we wouldn't get our money. And it wasn't a road authority that was saying that. So we entered a very strange sort of period. 4 years later, our submission on the college's submission on the draft National Road Safety Strategy return to the theme. And actually the thing which sticks out at me is our focus on some specific deliverables which could be done. And excellent that so many of them are actually in the National Road Safety Strategy and in the National Road Safety Action Plan. We're still just sort of struggling on some of these things still. Publication in easily consumable form for the public of infrastructure safety star ratings for all road users. Safety investment plans and budgets to achieve targeted improvements in safety star ratings. A regulatory impact statement for lowering the speed limits for urban roads and for rural roads. We know that that any rational analysis is going to come. It's just a matter of whether that analysis, how that analysis is treated, really. We know that there's no justification for the current limits. The question is, what is the process of change from here? And also to keep pace with the European Vehicle Safety Regulation, not the UN Vehicle Safety Regulation, to really make another shift in that environment. And making the case is really just so important. Coming back to the safety star ratings, this is actually what IRAP has on its website for now, this morning, actually. I looked at the stuff and I thought, oh no, that's a couple of years old. I should go and see what it is. So if you look at IRAP's website, this is what they show for Australia. And it's pretty shocking. And I would say that's a primary management concern. It's not an ethereal sort of, oh, let's do some more number crunching here. It's like, what the heck is going on? Where are all of these 1 and 2 star roads? What can be done and what is being done to eliminate them? Why is this essential public safety information not freely available? And really, why are we actually making a fuss about this? It's because it's very difficult to see a situation in which there are 0 fatalities and serious injuries without the public comprehending anything about the safety star ratings of the roads that they drive, and its interplay with speed limits, particularly. We're actually, after I would say, from a personal professional perspective, it's closer to 20 years than 15 years, where it's become patently obvious that we actually need to present this information to the public in a similar way that has driven up vehicle safety star ratings to almost universally 5 stars. It's a big story if a vehicle doesn't get 5 stars. And that's because of information within consumers and understanding about what needs to change. So this is my last slide, because I think that this is actually a really, really important period. So Austroads has actually taken responsibility for working with its members to publish the safety star ratings. And that's a really important step. And we wait daily now for the other jurisdictions in Australia to follow New South Wales' lead and to publish that information. And at the same time, we have the beginnings of a regulatory impact assessment of rural roads and rural road speed limits. And this is actually the point where we need to actually discuss these things in a meaningful way with the community. Because as I said, the communities, particularly in rural and regional Australia, they know what's going on here. I think they will be wondering, why haven't we seen this information before? when this information is released. I've said to every minister and chief executive that I've come across for some years now that they should feel safe in releasing that information from an organisation such as the college, because that is essential public safety information, and the release needs to be applauded when it occurs. But it's going to be quite challenging. It's going to be quite challenging. But actually, of course, that's opportunity for safety. So it's quite an important period, and I'm wondering, what is it that we, in 5 years' time, what might we learn from actually these things happening? From a results perspective, that we must focus on the big issues. From a governance perspective, that we must have strong results-focused management systems in place. From a legislation perspective, that primary and secondary and tertiary legislation, whether it's guidance for internal guidance within or standards within an organisation, right through to an act of parliament, need constant improvement. But actually, that really matters for safety. That leading change with integrity can be very painful. I'll never forget going to a rural council meeting very early on, arriving in South Australia, and it was deeply painful for that community that they'd been told that a little bit of shoulder sealing over a few kilometres was going to allow them to have a 110km/h speed limit. They'd been told that, and I had to say to them, well, that's not going to happen. We're not going to increase that speed limit back to 110. And that was very, very painful. And the change process has to be managed extremely well. Monitoring and evaluation, or funding, that no amount of infrastructure investment can make up for poor safety systems. Monitoring and evaluation, that investigating small problems in fundamentally unsafe environments is probably not the way to go. Knowledge transfer, that the transport profession needs a complete safety rewire. And probably not just the profession. I think we have made progress, but there's still some issues out there which are very easy to find. And management systems, that we've been suffering from accountability failure, not just implementation failure. And remember the review commissioned by the Commonwealth Government, conducted by John Crozier and Jeremy Woolley, and subsequently written up in the national strategy, was a story of implementation failure. I think what we've been seeing is accountability failure, and the focus on management systems can't come quick enough. Thanks, Jamie.
All right, thank you, Martin. Okay, now we have to press buttons and hopefully see Bernard.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, so look, I don't want to leave as much time as possible for questions. I know that we already have some great questions that have come in, and really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to this group in South Australia. Martin Small dobbed me in, and so I thought I'd better come along and talk a little bit about, I suppose from our point of view, in New South Wales, but more broadly in some of the national sort of forums that I'm involved in as well, that critical part of road safety management and leadership that's absolutely essential to us achieving our trauma reduction targets, but also our vision for zero trauma. I'd like to start by acknowledging I'm on the land of the Wallumattagal people and pay my respects to elders past and present, acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are either online or in the library today, and just reflect on the fact that in New South Wales, our Aboriginal communities and individuals are twice as likely to be involved in a casualty crash compared to the rest of the population, and that we continue to strive to work with community through a self-determination model to support them in changing that tragic outcome for their communities. I'd also like to just acknowledge that as of this morning, there are 261 deaths in New South Wales. That's 46 more than we had for the same period last year. And in spite of the fact that in 8 of the last 10 years, New South Wales has had the lowest number of fatalities on record for 8 out of those 10 years, we have seen a significant increase over this last 18-month period. And we need to be sort of, I think, accountable for the systems that are in place in order to rectify this tragic loss of life and acknowledge the families and communities that are affected by those 261 deaths. So in terms of the requirements for effective leadership and management, I know much of this is going to touch on information that Martin's already covered as well, so I'll try and do a light touch on those areas in particular. But, you know, our performance goal is to have zero harm, and to do that in a way that has a proactive management on that pathway to zero. And so, you know, I think in the Australian context, we seem to have fallen into let's do a 10-year strategy in terms of target reduction and meeting those targets over that 10-year period, and then a series of action plans so that along the pathway we're able to stop, revisit and actually determine what more needs to be done or what's actually being really effective and that we need to continue to maintain in that process. Need really great knowledge of the scientific evidence in order to select the best value interventions. And I think it's really important for us to also focus in on, we have targets for reducing trauma, you know, and that's, you know, the reason we exist is actually to reduce that impact on society and across our jurisdictions. Whilst we have those targets in place, we have a vision for zero harm in 2050. And so it's critical that we're working on both. That I think one of the critical management and leadership tasks is to maintain a focus of that investment that's necessary to reduce trauma now, whilst at the same time planning for a system that actually has zero trauma in the future. We need to make sure that the capacity to manage that action planning and implementation within and across sectors is really reinforced, and appreciate the governance frameworks that were put up by Martin earlier. I think that cross-sector, cross-agency, stakeholder and partner approach is absolutely critical to achieving the outcomes we're all seeking. And having effective leadership, so setting objectives, driving difficult choices and championing change. And I think setting targets which are ambitious but achievable, and providing the evidence base, the modelling and the implementation strategy that actually gets us to those targets, and making that transparent to the community and all people involved in the process is absolutely critical as well. I'll just quickly go around the wheel because you've seen a lot of this in what Martin's been talking about as well. Like, we need these multidisciplinary approaches to work in a complex system like we're engaged in order to achieve those outcomes and stay focused on reducing trauma. And so, you know, coordination, legislation and enforcement, and we need to be monitoring. We need to have the right sort of funding and resourcing in place. And I think one of the key issues that Martin's also raised is having a well-informed and engaged community, because if you don't have a constituency for change, then we can see what happens when you look to other jurisdictions. New Zealand is in a really difficult position right now, but we've all experienced this over our careers in working in this area, and I've seen it ebb and flow in our jurisdiction, where you really do need that community constituency to actually make change happen and to also stop the unwinding of safety in a way that actually increases risk and trauma as well. that performance monitoring and evaluation, and I think the transparency around that is absolutely critical. Shout out to the team who actually did get our OSRAP, and I think it's the largest, they have 35,000 kilometres of road network, both our state and regional road network, that have been now published. And we have been using that data for decision making since 2016. And so, as Martin's pointed out, it's a long road sometimes to this level of transparency, which I agree is absolutely critical to having an engaged community. And that research and development knowledge transfer, which is absolutely critical across not just the practitioners, but yourselves, but also the interagencies in understanding the benefits that actually accrue in health and in justice and in policing and in community and in the wellbeing sector, like that we really do recognise that what we achieve actually has this other benefits that come with it, and we need to engage people and have them understand those benefits. And being results focused, and that's that point around knowing the trauma, but also ensuring that we're putting in place the systemic changes that are required to have the vision for zero actually come to realisation. And so in summary, so, that focus on evidence-based, and encourage everybody to actually immerse yourself in understanding why and the trauma data and information that's available. And I think our success in New South Wales in actually being, I think, the only jurisdiction other than South Australia to see a decrease in the last decade when you compare the first 3 years of the decade with the last 3 years of the decade. We had 49 on average deaths less over that period. I think from memory, South Australia was 6, and now we have a 0.9 reduction in the total rate against the population over that period as well. And so it's really critically important that the evidence base is what's used for decision making, and really encourage everybody to really thoroughly understand those measures and the monitoring the system so that we can determine when there are upward pressures that we're currently experiencing in New South Wales, and being really transparent about the causes for the increase in the trauma as well. Leadership, being fully informed, I think is critical. Being vocal and being seen is absolutely critical. That's, from a road safety perspective, my view is that when we do have an increase of 46 deaths year on year, we're in a crisis of actually being able to reduce that level of trauma. It's just a significant impact on the community, and we need to respond to that from a leadership perspective and actually be vocal and be seen about advocating for change. And community participation. I think that change happens when we harness the power of constituency in the community. And I've got to say, in New South Wales, the establishment of the Road Trauma Support Group and the funding and resourcing of them to provide support in the community, but also to do research and publish information which actually identifies what the level of traumatic experience it is for people post-crash, has actually made a significant difference to the way in which our community, but also politicians, are responding to the needs of that community and seeing reform happen, which is really critically important to supporting them. And to that point, whilst I totally get the complex systems comments that Martin's been making, and I'm a total advocate for these things are totally interdependent on each other, I actually do think in Australia, having left post-crash care off, this systematic approach to reducing trauma, it's time to re-contemplate how that should be dealt with in both the national and our jurisdictional plans as well. And the other part of this conversation, I think, is ensuring that we actually understand what the community support for these measures is as well. So from a management perspective, as you would all know, there are advocates for a whole range of different outcomes, and some of those, at times actually have precedence over the safety outcome, in spite of the fact that leaders do say that safety is the number one thing that we want to achieve. And so we've been regularly checking with the community through a whole range of mechanisms, but this is results from a representative survey sample across the state for the level of support that people have for these particular measures. When we put these in front of leaders, they quite often, flabbergasted and don't believe, or it's not their reality because they're either captured by people who are saying we shouldn't be doing more of these actions across the system. And so I think that building constituency and support for the measures that are really critically important is an essential part of our road safety management system as well. And then I just point out as well, and this is just for reference here, catching up to the best in the world is actually a theme that I think is absolutely critically important, and learning from each other. And when, recently WA was in a bit of a media frenzy about young driver fatalities, them being able to pick up the phone and being able to then source information around the systems and processes that we put in place in New South Wales that's seen, more than a halving of the involvement of young drivers in fatal crashes in the last decade, and being able to use that resource to then implement reform in their jurisdiction. This notion that we can continue to ensure that we're driving towards zero by following best practice around the world, but also between our own jurisdictions, I think is a fundamental to good leadership as well as good road safety management. And having those frameworks that have been well researched, evidence-based and evaluated, readily available and supporting each other is absolutely critical in my view for achieving our outcomes, because we know that jurisdictions like Norway, if we had the rate at which Norway is in 2023, 174 lives or deaths would have been prevented in New South Wales. And we know the systemic changes that are required to actually achieve this as well. And I'm very much a advocate for Klaus Tyndale's presentation of this, which is that the citizen's not to blame. Yes, where they are acting deliberately in a way that actually puts themselves and others at risk, you want them to be held to account, but they don't determine how much RBT happens, and they don't determine how safe the vehicles are that are being imported into our economy, and they don't determine the safety systems or the regulation of the system. They don't determine how much wire rope gets put on roads where people are likely to run off road. The accountability actually sits with the people who have the capacity to change the system. And we need to engage community to get support for those changes, absolutely. But we do need to, I think, reinforce that accountability with those people who are, and organisations and institutions who can really make change happen. And I think I'm wrapping up on this slide, but this is our journey in New South Wales. And, we know that there are things that actually work and we are not necessarily doing enough of them, or we're not applying them in a way now which actually is making a difference. And so I'd reflect on the, 50 years ago, the introduction of the seatbelt laws, which required people to wear seatbelts in 1971. We had 34 deaths last year of people not wearing seatbelts, not being properly restrained. And the introduction of seatbelt monitoring through our sort of world first mobile phone camera program meant that we were able to screen 140 million vehicles last year in this last 12 months for whether or not they were wearing seatbelts correctly or at all, and halved the rate of offending during that period. So there are always things that we can continue to reinvent and use technology and change the legislative frameworks. And so I think just to end on this one, if we had the same rate as we did back in 1982, 1980 with the introduction of RBT, last year there would have been more than 2,200 deaths in New South Wales. And there were 327 deaths. That's 320 too many. But we stand on the background of all of these people who've actually provided the leadership and provided the road safety management systems that have actually introduced all of these changes over time to get us to where we are now. We need to make sure that we're maintaining a high standard of that road safety management and leadership into the future if we're going to get to our vision for zero trauma.
Thank you very much, Bernard. All right, we're going to switch to some Q&A, and I just realised we didn't have our camera on, so turn that on. Oh.
So I was waving, but the camera wasn't on.
That's right. If you could unshare, Bernard, and then hopefully we can get you and Martin on the screen for everyone.
Here we go.
And I will ask you some questions. Okay. All right. So the first one I have is, how do we balance short-term political decision-making with the long-term vision of zero deaths and serious injuries on our roads?
Bernard might have a more contemporary answer to that, but I think that very briefly, you have to have big ticket items in your bottom drawer, things which you've gone through, you've developed to a point where a pitch can be made, and you're a step away from having decisions made. That's the long-term thing. The short-term thing is actually almost entirely contextual. And the fact is, sometimes you actually just have to deliver on a half-baked agenda, because that's actually a critical way of getting trust and actually having the opportunity to do more. So it's actually, I think, about having that longest perspective, and then simply responding as best you can, making opportunities as best you can, and building trust in your capability to deliver results.
Yeah, look, the only thing I'd add there is that I think the setting ambitious, achievable targets and making those the public sort of, and also setting measures that we know are going to make a difference, and making the public accountability for the achievement of those targets and measures keeps people focused. And I think that's critical when you're dealing with that short-termism, is that having governments committed to achieving a target, which for lots of different reasons may not be being achieved, actually does give impetus for the additional and new measures, which means that you've got to have a really strong evidence base, and, as Martin was saying, a baton in the bag to step forward with, to actually say, hey, we can make a difference by doing this additional work. And meanwhile, as well, not sweating those things which do no harm, which people want to see happen, that aren't necessarily specifically, clearly trauma reduction measures, and incorporating those in a suite of things that we actually do with the community to build confidence in the other measures that actually are reducing trauma.
Right. So I've got questions that have been sent in prior, but the people online, feel free to send in questions, and those in the audience, feel free to put your hands up as well. But I'll go again with one that we've had online. Other examples where road safety management has successfully collaborated with other initiatives, such as transport decarbonisation and climate change or trauma service planning.
I have a really good example that then I'll throw to Martin on the follow-up on this. Prior to coming into road safety, I was the head of sustainability in the environment portfolio in New South Wales, and we ran a sustainable business program. And that sustainable business program, we just worked with making, getting emissions reductions, that sort of stuff involved, and recycling and everything else. And we had some freight companies that actually changed their vehicle speeds from 90 to 80 and saved more than $160,000 in fuel costs, as well as wear and tear on their vehicles. And it made a really big difference. And at the time, I wasn't reflecting on the fact that they de-risked their vehicles from being involved in crashes across the network as well at the same time. And I think there's a lot within the sustainability framework with working with people that we don't necessarily accentuate, that we could be. And another area which Martin did a comprehensive evaluation of our high pedestrian activity areas. We don't tend to sell the economic and other social and amenity benefits that are derived from that program, which almost eliminates pedestrian fatalities. So I think there's another in the era of placemaking being a contemporary way of developing both economic and social values within high density areas. Low speed environments actually contribute to that significantly.
So look, actually one example that I was going to give was the classic one from well over a decade now. That's the decision by Simon National Carriers to reduce the operating speed of their truck fleet, which is part of what Bernard has just referenced about actually delivering a massive safety benefit while actually saving dollars. That's a classic. I think from a sort of a formal perspective, I think that one thing which we haven't really made enough of, and we are doing it clearly, but I have been taken for some years with the sustainable urban mobility planning process. And that's something which is actually, I would say it's not been driven by safety considerations, but actually every part of it is very consistent with or completely reinforcing safety imperatives and delivering safety results. And that whole connection, I think, is something which we need to do much more on the co-collaboration of co-benefits and the like. One thing I would say is that this is not something for road safety management. I'd like to just sort of say that actually that road safety management perspective is actually about the total task. It's not about particulars here and particulars there. It's actually about thinking, okay, we've got this very significant problem. How are we actually going to put things in place which will drive this problem away and start eliminating?
Okay, we've got a hopefully inspirational one next. What advice do you have for emerging road safety leaders?
I'll go first on this one, and then Bernard can go first on the next one. Look, I think that sustainable mobility thing is a really important thing right now, and will be into the future. That you can explain and you can explain safety and you can promote safety within a very consistent and beneficial environment. The fact is that the hazard is motor vehicles. that's a primary hazard. So that's the starting point already. If you're in a sustainable mobility environment, anything which is actually prioritising movement, which is not just focused on whatever the term is for people driving around in cars with just one or two people in them, not terribly efficient at all, and is actually that's hazardous activity. That's how people get killed. So anything which is building that, so complete familiarity with that whole discussion, I think, is actually really important from a safety perspective for any emerging leader now. And that's sort of like keeping on learning in those things. And I think that means that you're going to need to be more sophisticated when you actually advocate. And that's a task which every emerging leader should be familiar with, the sort of difficulty of doing that. Actually, you're engaged in change, and that's not a straightforward thing. So familiarity with advocacy. I think the only other thing I'd say is be prepared to step out. You will actually learn things from other activities. So if you are an emerging leader, you're probably going to be useful in some other endeavour, not specifically a road safety endeavour. That's okay. You won't lose the road safety stuff that you have experienced, and actually when you return, you will be bringing back a whole lot more richer activity.
Thanks, Martin. So mine's sort of just at the next level down around the personal sort of commitment, for emerging road safety leaders, and whether they happen to be young or not young emerging road safety leaders. So the first point is like immersing yourself in the data and the research and having a thorough understanding of what it is that the evidence says that actually works and what is actually happening out there in the community. The second is to set a really strong personal ethical framework around the belief that all deaths and serious injuries are preventable, and making that a part of your professional sort of standing for yourself. And the last one is to say yes to every opportunity, to be an advocate for change, or to, as Martin just said, to branch out and experience other sectors and other issues, and using that knowledge and understanding and commitment that you've achieved in your work in road safety to other parts of society as well, with potentially the view of coming back, because these things, as we sort of all been saying today, are interconnected, and so the value of your professional learning and standing and commitment will have a benefit for everyone, no matter where you go.
You presented a list of hierarchy from just to the my question is, what about leadership? And where is the verdict?
It might be from people who have suffered, and by saying people who have suffered, it's that might be people who have actually physically injured, but it might be people who are suffering from the loss of others. And I think that Peter Fraser needs a particular shout out for what he has done, which I think has lifted that advocacy to a level that wasn't there before, I would suggest. I think that there is always opportunity for somebody to say this isn't this isn't right, we should do something about it. The classic one actually is Jacques Chirac getting sick of being laughed at in European audiences. I don't know exactly where the primary champions are going to come from, but I think that the professions are going to have a long, the professions need to be there right the way through. And I think being champions within the professions is probably our best bet at the moment. So you don't just let things pass when you know that there's stuff which isn't being done or is being looked over or is not actually being given the priority that it deserves. Some thoughts.
Did you want to comment on that one, Bernard?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that question from the audience.
I think it was about where our road safety champions are going to come from. What sort of, and particularly what level of, does it need to come from right at the top or from the community members or somewhere in between?
So I regularly get out and talk to people from different sectors, and my view is that we all have a voice. This impacts all of us and it impacts everybody right across the community. 1 in 4 people are actually directly impacted from a fatality on a road in New South Wales, and there's a fatality or serious injury every 46 minutes. And so I would encourage everyone to have a voice here in whatever circles you or professional standing you have at whatever level within an organisation, because it actually will take all of those voices. It will take a community momentum to make those changes happen that we know will reduce the trauma. And meanwhile, we do need to latch on to leaders. If I could, I might have posted a little thing that I saw on Instagram with Barack Obama actually referencing the reduction of trauma from vehicle accidents, and apology for using the word accidents, but that was his language, in the United States, in order to implore people to actually apply the same sort of evidence-based approach to gun harm in the United States. So there are people out there talking about it. I think the more you can be an advocate, the more you can, within your own circles, present the facts in terms of the evidence base for change, the greater the momentum for that change and the faster we'll get to the sort of reforms that we need in the system.
Okay, we've got a question online. So there are seemingly some easy wins for road safety, but for some reason, because of consumer pressure, we don't get the wins. For example, the UN regulation for pedestrian protection could have been adopted in Australia, but we didn't adopt it. How do we overcome these issues?
I went first last time, Bernard. But look,
you want to give me the
there's no easy answer. There's no easy answer to that. I think that as I've illustrated, actually, it's only now that we're coming close to a point where we're going to have a discussion possible about the infrastructure safety and speed limits. And that's been years and years and years in the making. Some things actually take a painfully long period of time. I don't know about I know about the pedestrian thing. That's an appalling state of affairs. I think that the most important thing is actually to keep renewing those primary things which you know are going to actually make a difference, and keep pursuing and creating opportunities to be able to demonstrate them and or deliver them.
Yeah, look, I'd reinforce that by saying, the evidence is very clear for a lot of these changes in terms of the impact that they would have. But the opening an opportunity for the people who have control over the system to actually make the decision to do the change and to engage with the community on that basis, that's a lot of hard work. And it does come back, I think, to the previous question, which is, who's going to be the advocate? Well, I think we need to share all of this information and the benefits associated with the changes right across the community, right across our organisations like ACRS, be evidence-based in advocacy for those changes. I do believe that the engagement of people who are have been affected by the trauma, and them telling their stories associated with those issues that we want to make change happen in, it is blatantly more powerful than some bureaucrat from the government turning up, or sorry, public servant, I don't like the word bureaucrat, public servant turning up and trying to convince people of that change. And so I do think we do need to engage with people who have a voice, or providing a voice, those people who've been impacted, like the great example of Peter Fraser, but more of them in actually influencing the changes that need to happen, because otherwise they do get stuck. And I think you're quite right to reference the clear evidence, if you put it in front of people, of the trauma reduction benefit of dropping the default 100-kilometre speed limits in New South Wales to lower levels. We know that will save lives. It's about how and when, getting it through those processes to ensure that that change happens.
Right, I'll take the opportunity to ask my own question. I'm interested to know what, I guess, road safety management or leadership, how you deal with the multiple levels of government that we have in Australia in particular. And just leading off the previous question, sort of, we know that the federal government, for example, regulates the vehicles that come and then crash on our state and local roads, and therefore it must be frustrating to have no control of that as a state and local government. And I think another example that we're dealing with at the moment is things like e-scooters that are managed presumably by the ACCC, and then come and cause trauma on the roads. How do we sort of deal with that and manage that?
Well, we have a constitution, and that defines various functions and principles in the administration of those functions and the like. And I think, I mentioned the National Inquiry report from, well, it's however many years ago now. One of the defining features of that, which I said to Jeremy Woolley and John Crozier at the time, was actually it had the best first attempt at actually identifying the national agenda. And that is an agenda in Australia which is associated with federal government and state and territory government. So I actually think that, that you need to be clear, but it goes across all stakeholders. You need to be very clear about what the roles and responsibilities are. Is this a regulated party that I'm engaging with? And what's the quality of the regulation that they are operating under? And what sort of expectations can be made of them? But also similarly with governments, what can you actually ask a government to do, and how would you actually impact upon that? So actually, state and territories have been really, really important in shifting that national agenda, I think. And there'll be times where the Commonwealth will as well. And I think it's an excellent thing which the Commonwealth have, started moving towards, actually tying some state and territory things to money that they're handing over. So I actually think it comes down to roles and responsibilities, actually. Never ask somebody something which they can't do.
Yeah, look, I think that in each of the action plans that you'll see in the state jurisdictions, that there's, references to our engagement with local government and support and supportive systems for local government, as well as the references to advocacy with the federal government on those matters that they have control over, like Australian design rules. I think sometimes within our sort of naturally within our society where there are emerging issues which we don't get to early enough, quickly enough. And I think, vapes is a great example of that from a public health perspective in terms of, 40 years of, and I reference this because I worked in health promotion about that time ago, 40 years of smoking prevention system changes that actually all of a sudden started to unravel because of the unregulated use of vapes. And government is traditionally not as nimble as the economy and the market in creating those sorts of circumstances. And I think we're probably in the same situation at the moment with e-mobility. But I think I'm slightly heartened by the fact that people actually have started to step into that now and started at the national and all across the jurisdictions actually see this as a really critical issue of safety to be thinking about the regulatory framework around how we manage the risk going forward. So while sometimes I think government can be slow in responding to those market forces, I think that, at the moment, if you're not watching the ministerial council sort of outcomes as they come out, there is, I think, a renewed effort there to tackle that risk from a safety perspective in terms of the advancement of e-mobility devices.
All right, we are 12:15. I'm going to ask one last question to close out. If Australia, a state or jurisdiction or the federal government were to deprioritise road safety in a similar manner to New Zealand, what strategy would you develop and deploy in that situation? Provocative last question.
I'm happy to go first, Bernard, unless you would like. Look, well, Bernard alluded to it. It's a very difficult situation. If you've been in the game for any period, you will have struck it, regrettably. And it can feel extremely lonely for teams, for organisations, for leaders. I think the most important thing is actually to hold your nerve and to never create a situation in which you're actually saying something which is not actually directly related to safety, value, performance, as evidence suggests, and all of that sort of thing. So it's almost like going back into what the core safety arguments are and what they are not. Because I think that allows you to respond as well as you possibly can to sometimes quite antagonistic environments. I think that one thing which can work is to create space. So one of the things that you end up doing is chasing things constantly. And what happens in these periods is that nobody's asking you to do anything. In fact, they want you to stop. And they want you to deprioritise. Actually, that can create some space for saying, well, yeah, let's actually have a bit of a longer think about what it is that we actually need to do in this situation. What were the conditions that allowed this situation to deteriorate? And one of the conditions might well be that you hadn't actually been working well enough with your stakeholders and your partners. Because that's actually an important part of the equation, and those stakeholders, those third parties, those relationships are so absolutely vital, as are relationships with your peers. And a similar thing. What was it about how we are presenting as a professional group or the like that has allowed this situation to occur? And what does that mean for my relationship with my peers who aren't being deprioritised? I actually am a very strong believer in preaching to the converted. and you actually need to maintain space for being able to speak about safety to people who are primary stakeholders. And of course, another thing is actually get ready, because it won't last. So actually getting ideas together for what actually can be done from that point, that'd be some strategies I would be deploying in that situation, which is an awful one to face.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd say, as Martin's suggested, like, it's not a uniquely New Zealand, it's very high profile and obvious to people. I think lots of jurisdictions go through this often in terms of the sort of impacts on slowing progress or questioning safety measures. And so I think one of the key things here, and I work closely with our New Zealand colleagues currently, but the evidence base and being transparent about the evidence base and engaging with community and stakeholders around the evidence, having a really strong narrative around the benefit is absolutely critical. And you can see that playing out as well, that there's very strong response to the evidence that this is actually a measure that not just the community want, but it's actually reducing trauma. To the point that Martin raised as well about the key for all of us is to actually don't wait for this to happen. Like, it's going to come through the cycle at some point, where you're sidelined or being questioned, or there's a cost of living crisis, or whatever the other issues are that are impacting on the community that political leadership will turn their mind to and away from our issues. And so, building that really strong constituency continuously in preparation for those times which will inevitably come is absolutely critical, because you need your supporters outside of the government, in order to maintain the discussion in the community about the fact that the evidence says that these things work. And the other thing is as well, I think, from our point of view, is actually sort of the collegiate nature of road safety as a community of interest as well, and leaning in and supporting those other jurisdictions when they get to that point of actually being under pressure is, I think, also a really valuable part. It's something that I have appreciated over the many years that I've worked in the road safety area, that there are, when things actually happen, which inevitably none of us would like to see happen, which actually reduce our capacity to save lives, it is a community where people actually do reach out and try and support and provide additional effort in supporting those people who are in that circumstance. And so I'd say, ACRS has a really critical role in all of this. Individual members and people across different sectors in seeing those things happen, in actually speaking up and supporting those people who clearly at that point in time, it's, as Martin says, it's can be very lonely and disempowering when those circumstances change in the way that they have, like in New Zealand. But yes, and as you said, I've had plenty of those experiences over the last 13 years here as well, and appreciate it when people actually pop up across the community and actually say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. This is, what we should be doing as a community.
All right. Well, on behalf of the audience here and everyone online, I'd like to thank Martin and Bernard for presenting today. It's been really fantastic to get those opinions. I think we'll all agree that this is a very important topic that doesn't get as much exposure as it should. So this has been a fantastic session. Please do keep an eye out for future events, and hopefully I'll see a whole bunch of you at the conference in Perth. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.